Check out AOA.com for 30 to 50% off of Destiny 2 Silver and an extra 6% with code Dichronic. Link in the description down below. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. My name's Dichronic, your host here on this Destiny 2 video, and today we're going to be taking a look at my top 10 Titan exotics in Destiny 2. And as many of you may know, I am a Titan main because I find it the most fun to play as a Titan, so I try to keep a lot of this in an objective look on their effectiveness. And of course, I have made a spreadsheet for this video that you'll be seeing throughout the video. Link to that, fully public, at my Discord server, link in the description down below, on the channel #SpreadsheetStocks. And as a little note there, is I recently added a verification bot to my Discord. You will be asked to verify if you're not already in the Discord server. It's usually very quick, and hopefully this will alleviate the number of scammers there. A little PSA there's a lot of scammers on Discord of late, so if you ever see something that seems weird from a complete stranger, just take what they say, rule of thumb, put it into Google. And if a lot of people say that it's a scam, don't do it. And if you haven't heard already, I still have a giveaway going on right now. Astro A10 headset, Blue Yeti microphone, link in the description down below. It is very close to being over. Moving on, let's go ahead and take a look at the spreadsheet. As you can see on screen right now, this is my spreadsheet. And all of its dark theme, color-coded pictures, scores for PvE, PvP, rankings for all of the different exotics in Destiny 2 for the Titans, as well as the other ones, if you ever want to check those as well. Now, obviously, I don't really do my top 10s like a lot of other people do. Instead of just going through the top 10, which we will go through the top 10, I'll also be talking about all of the non-ranked items and talk about why they weren't ranked in the top 10. First up at number 10, we have the Hallowfire Heart, an exotic that I've actually liked for a very long time. Back in the last Wish days, I used it pretty much every single day because it gives you 2 times the speed of regeneration on your grenade and melee, and when you have your super fully charged, it goes up to 4 times the speed. Now, obviously, this is universally useful for all of your solar subclasses. However, solar is not the best in the game. In PvP, has a little bit more efficacy after stasis did get nerfed, but it is still a lot of fun, and it really helps you get a lot of grenades and melees whenever you need it. Especially with Hammer Strike making the enemies weaker, it makes it so you can kill people quite effectively. Up next at number 9, we have the Phoenix Cradle. In a very similar capacity as the Hallowfire Heart, it is based on the bottom tree sunspot stuff of the solar subclass, and its main perk makes Sun Warrior last twice as long, from 5 seconds to 10 seconds, and any allies that walk through Sun Warrior's sunspots also get that bonus. And Sun Warrior gives you a number of bonuses, including increasing your damage by around 25%. Now, this is considered a player damage bonus, so it will not stack with other things like Weapons of Light or Empowerment from Wells, but you don't always have that option. And especially if you're playing a Grandmaster Nightfall with Ursa Furiosa, you're getting your super constantly, which gives you tons of opportunities to set up sunspots whenever you want them. And a fun little fact here is that it technically works with Jotun. For some reason, kills with Jotun will create a sunspot at destination and does a lot of damage to your enemies, as well as, again, being able to give you and your allies sunspots, which works much better in raids, for example, that gives that sunspot ability to everyone. The only thing holding it back right now is that solar is not really that strong in the meta. Up next at number 8, we have the Lion Rampant, which is a very simple exotic. Basically gives you a longer lift, additional aerial maneuverability, kind of like strafe lift, and it enables accurate hipfire while you're in the air during lift, which works really well with hipfire weapons like shotguns, sidearms, DMT, Last Word. Obviously, DMT did get nerfed into the ground, but it was really nice to be able to defensive float above a doorway and shoot down, hip fire at your enemy, and be very accurate. On the PvE side of things, this is just incredibly useful for jump puzzles, especially if you use the Catapult, Lion Rampant, Sword combo. You can stay in the air for like 6 or 7 times longer than a normal lift. And more than that, technically over the long run is faster than Dune Marchers when it comes to a overall top speed. It's definitely one of those exotics that you need to have in your collection, especially if you're trying to go for a flawless raid or a dungeon. It is really nice to be able to switch to something that just makes it a little bit more conceivable. Perhaps conceivable is not the right word, but it sounds pretty smart, right? Up next at number 7, we have the Synthoceps. You've heard of the 1-inch punch. Now, have you heard of the 1-mile punch? That's basically this exotic, giving you increased melee lunge range, similar to that of Warlock, plus a fit in aspects, which is really, really long. Especially after the nerfs to a lot of shotguns, including aggressives, and the nerf to quick draw, shotguns are less potent, and exotics like this can surprise people quite a lot. And it's honestly one of the better overall exotics in the game, because both in PvE and PvP it gets a 7.5 out of 10. And for the rest of the perk, you also get increased melee and super damage when you're surrounded, and the more surrounded you are, you get even more damage. In PvP, this can lead to one-shot melees. For example, with the Code of the Juggernaut bottom tree arc, you can start getting healing and one-shot melees with this exotic with a lot of enemies around you. And for the PvE side of things, you want that extra super damage, which can mean the difference of getting a one-hit melee on certain enemies or not. Especially if you don't have a lot of the highest top-rated exotics, just having more super damage is really nice. Coming up next at number 6, we have the Heart of Inmost Light. Again, another somewhat simple exotic that's actually omni-useful, very good in PvE and PvP alike. The main perk, basically any of your main 3 abilities, grenade, melee, or barricade, empowers the other 2 abilities, either giving it more health or more damage, which will make the difference of getting a one-shot magnet grenade hit or a one-shot fusion grenade hit, or just increasing your damage overall. Because doing more damage or having more hit points in your barricade is always nice. And especially considering how universal it is, it can be used with stasis, it can be used with any of the light subclasses, and it can be used in so many different builds that revolve around abilities whatsoever. This is essentially the neutral game booster, just making your neutral game a lot better. Up next at number 5, we have the Doomfang Pauldrons, one of my favorite overall exotics since the beginning of the game, making your Sentinel Shield way better. Now this exotic actually used to be at number 1 because it used to be a 9 out of 10 in PvE solely for the actual perk that this thing gives you and how much it transforms Sentinel Shield. It essentially allows your Sentinel Shield to last anywhere from 50% to an infinite percent longer as long as there's enemies on the field, which increases the time that you're resisting damage, increases the time that you're taking attention from all the enemies, and of course gives you a ranged option, a defensive option, and an upfront melee option that all generates the super energy, kills, and so on and so forth. Now obviously a lot of people would argue it's not that effective in the highest level play in Grandmasters, but I have in fact used it in Grandmasters, and you have to keep in mind you have much higher resistance, and you have a defensive option, and you have a ranged option. So it actually is not that bad in Grandmasters. But my favorite place to use it is whenever the enemies are unlimited, so is your super. Altars of Sorrows is just a lot of fun with this exotic. On the counter side for PvP, obviously Sentinel Shield is not the strongest, and Stasis just completely shuts it down. Up next at number 4, we have the Dune Marchers, a sprint speed and melee based exotic. So in PvE is kind of good, but very limited by its melee, and in PvP allows you to kill a ton of enemies that you didn't even know were there by ricocheting lightning off of multiple different sources. And right now we have the glitch where you can actually activate it off your ice crystals, which is kind of ridiculous. So first things first, it increases your sprint speed, which overall, if you don't know, mobility is huge in shooter games. Pretty much all of the main mobility exotics are in the top 10. Stompies, Dune Marchers, Transversive Steps. Secondly, anytime you're sprinting for pretty much shoulder charge duration, you actually get the ability to melee and cause a lot of electricity to all nearby enemies, which is 15 meters away and then 15 meters from every subsequent enemy. So you hit a lot of enemies, even dead ghost enemies, just by hitting that melee attack, which you don't actually have to do right away. You build up that sprint, and any melee after that actually releases the electricity. This is pretty much one of the best exotics you can use for Titan in PvP. Likewise, coming up at number 3, we have the One-Eyed Mask. In my opinion, the number 1 best PvP exotic for the Titan. Its main perk, Vengeance, highlights enemies who dare to damage you, making them a little bit easier to see against background, especially in foliage with people with certain armor sets, and tracking down that enemy and killing them gives you an overshield. And the timer on Vengeance duration as well as its cooldown is a lot better than it used to be, even after like 4 or 5 nerfs. Now, the position that One-Eyed Mask in, I believe, is actually pretty fair. The positions that it used to be in, almost 10 out of 10, and used to be 10 out of 10 before, was kind of ridiculous. If you don't know, it used to give you a damage bonus, it let you see enemies through walls, and it gave you that overshield immediately, instantly, and healed you, which was ridiculous. Nowadays, it's much more reasonable. And for the PvE side of things, I actually would recommend it. For example, in raids, when you're using Bubble, you don't need Helm of Same 14. It doesn't give you much bonus in raids for giving damage to the boss. So if you find that you ever die a lot, One-Eyed Mask can be the difference of keeping you alive. And the last thing I'll say about One-Eyed Mask is that it works for pretty much any playstyle. I would say a lot of defensive players definitely go more towards One-Eyed Mask, and more aggressive players can still use it, but also could use Dune Marchers, whereas a defensive player may not want to run in with Dune Marchers. Coming up at number 2, we have the Curse of a Falling Star, for when a sun hitting your planet would hurt less than this particular exotic. And if you've never heard of it, it makes Thunder Crash do double the damage, which puts it pretty much at the top for the highest DPS in the game, definitely the highest burst damage, and can nearly one-shot champions in a Grandmaster Nightfall. And on top of that, you also get an overshield the longer you're flying through the air, which can drastically increase your level of survivability after hitting the target, which most of the time you're killing everybody around you, at the very least stumbling all of them. which is my initial concern with this exotic, is that you are right in the fray, basically melee range, but that overshield combined with the big impact area and stun really helps out. And this particular exotic really shook up the meta. Whereas before this exotic, we wanted more Celestial Nighthawk Hunters, now we want more Titans. And like I said before, you can nearly one-shot enemy champions into Grandmasters, and that is huge. And to be honest, the most fun that I have in Destiny 2 these days is the Curse of a Falling Star, going full Titan mode and headbutting my enemy. This is what it means to be a Titan. And finally, coming up at number 1, we have the Ursa Furiosa. Pretty much the most commonly used Titan exotic in Grandmaster Nightfalls. If you use it with the banner shields of Middle Void, you can last a really long time. Your allies can shoot through it for extra damage with weapons of light. You generate orbs for them for all damage that you get hit by, and it also lasts a really long time and generates around 75% of your super after you finish your super, which allows you to pretty much get a full super after a Well of Radiance or another Ursa is being used. And a big thing you need to understand is that it is somewhat carried by the subclass, because what this exotic does is it basically just generates super energy by receiving damage to your Sentinel Shield. The Sentinel Shield itself generates the orbs, the Banner Shield with allies behind you makes it last longer, and of course Banner Shield allows your teammates to shoot through it for extra damage. But with this exotic, it becomes a perfect synergy and makes it incredibly useful to get supers to your teammates at all times. Quite literally, infinite supers if you have 2 Ursa Titans, or Well of Radiance plus an Ursa, just swapping back and forth between them. And as a fun little note here, before Stasis was in the game, using Ursa Furiosa in PvP was actually a lot of fun as well, considering most enemies would try to shoot your shield with a super, with heavy ammo, with a special ammo, and all you do is just walk into them, they would be suppressed, and they would die from blocking into them, and you'd get half to 75% of your super. However, these days, Stasis does actually go through it and does freeze you. However, with the nerf to Stasis, it's a slight bit more viable than it used to be. And that's going to be the end of the top 10 rankings. Now we're going to move into all of the non-ranked items, and I would actually recommend that you watch this section of the video because you don't want to be just stuck on the top 10. You don't want to just use the best of the best because first of all, it makes it quite a dry game because there's a lot of really fun exotics that are just not top 10 worthy that are part of this list that you should definitely know about. A great example is this first one, Insurmountable Skullfort, one of the most fun exotics in the game. Just missed being in the top 10. And I will try to be very brief about these. If you had further questions about them, let me know in the comments down below. An Insurmountable Skullfort, one of the more fun exotics in the game, allowing you to get health regeneration and your entire melee back just by hitting and killing enemies with the arc subclasses, and works really well with getting extra grenades, extra shoulder charge with top tree arc tree. However, obviously limited by the fact that it's melee. Pretty much every melee exotic is pretty much 7 and below, with this one being the only exception because it has healing. Eternal Warrior, one of the better swappable exotics, allowing your smash to be a lot more durable, and actually smash being somewhat in the meta for PvP, but it is kind of lame and I'm often very lazy. Helmslane 14, an actual good exotic, 7.5 out of 10 for PvE, but most of the time people mistake the bubble's effectiveness for this exotic's effectiveness, because the bubble basically carries this exotic. The benefit you get from this exotic is nice, but only really useful when an enemy ends up entering your bubble. Kepri's Horn can technically kill a Guardian by itself with both hits of the fire thing, but most people when they see it, they'll understand it and they'll just walk away. Master the Quiet One only technically gives you maximum health on kills, not health and shields, and the ability generation is okay, but Inmost Light is just much better. Precious Scars, only really useful in trials because you can revive your teammates in trials, and most of the time revives are camped by an enemy sniper, and this overshield is not going to make enough difference. ACD Feedback Fence actually gives you a pretty good overall damage reduction, but by the time you get meleeed, usually you're already dead. Ashen Wake, quite a fun exotic to use in certain builds, allows you to get the one-shot fusion grenade by using Roaring Flames of Devastator, but is very limited by being tied directly to that one subclass. Titan's Ramparts is really nice in trials to be able to have a safe sniper perch, and actually really effective against cheaters because you can shoot them before they can kill you, but very limited by the fact it's only really that useful in trials. Icefall Mantle does give you an overshield, but it does make you quite slow, and I'd oftentimes rather have a towering barricade. Outside of Heir Apparent, that is. With Heir Apparent, this thing becomes even better, because it does stack with Heir Apparent's 4 times damage resistant Catalyst Shield. Stronghold, a number of bonuses to your sword, but none of them really matter that much. I'd rather have swing speed, charge speed, or damage. Worm God Crest, pretty much the maximum melee damage exotic, but it depends on getting melee kills, which is dangerous in the higher level. Axiom War Rig, basically an extended mag for your auto rifles or heavy machine guns, does work with Xenophage and Garden of Salvation boss, but oftentimes I'll just switch weapons to my special weapon and finish it off. Doesn't really make a big difference overall. Armamentarium, definitely an excellent overall omni-useful exotic. Having an extra grenade, which does give you overflow charging, is nice, just not enough to get top 10. Crest of Alpha Loopy gives you ability to heal yourself and your teammates from your barricade, which is nice to see, kind of like Wormhusk, and an extra orb when you summon your super, but it's kind of lame and boring. Severance Enclosure, giving you an explosion that doesn't usually kill enemies in PvP unless they're really close to you, and in PvE, usually you're finishing the last enemy in the area. And again, it doesn't do that much damage. Antea Swords, actually pretty useful in PvP, but you do have to sprint for a full 2 seconds before it activates, and it still does reflect behind you a little bit, which is nice, but nowhere near as good. It's not a 9.5 out of 10 as it used to be. The Path of the Burning Steps. Admittedly, I haven't had really a lot of time to use this, but it does give you a relatively simple way to get an extra damage bonus that does stack with all the other bonuses. I don't know why it stacks with all the other bonuses, but it does. So if you have a consistent way to get solar damage kills, it can add to your DPS, but not going to really make that big a difference compared to something like Ursa or Falling Star or even Phoenix Cradle. Peacekeepers, number of bonuses to your SMGs that are not really that necessary since most SMGs move quite quickly, aim down sights quickly, and swap quickly. However, technically did get an indirect buff after we got a nerf to quick draw. And finally, Peregrine Grieves, giving you a lot of extra damage by using a shoulder charge melee in the air that can technically one-shot melee a bubble titan in his bubble, but most of the time supers can just run away from you or kill you before you get to them, and only ever useful if an enemy super is there. And that is pretty much the end of the video. Thank you so much for watching all the way through. I know that these exotic armor videos are much longer than the weapon ones because I do want to cover all of the exotics and they do take some time. And of course, a big thank you to my patrons on Patreon. Truly, without their help, these spreadsheets would not be possible. They take 10 to 20 hours every single week. I make absolutely no money from them, and they are there as just a resource that I really like. And I know that a lot of you guys like too. So if you appreciate them, please consider checking out my Patreon, link in the description down below. And yeah, that's the end of it. Hope you guys did enjoy. My name's Dmt, and I'll see you guys on the next one.